Well, good morning, everyone. We'll talk about some plant identification, looking at some resources first of all, and then what I'd like to do is to take you through a computer program that is really quite useful for identifying plants. So when we think about small acreages and why we would be interested in being in a rural area, some of the values that we might see are things like it's just open and there's more space between people, enjoying wildlife, may have some livestock that you're interested in working with. You might have interest in plant production, and sometimes just enjoying that rural landscape. Those are all possibilities as to why we might want to live in these rural areas. But one of the things that we want to be conscious of is that plants are important to all those interests that we might have in living in a rural area on a small acreage property. And in order to really have a good idea of what might be on a noxious list or an invasive list, and Steve really did a good job of outlining what that would require of us. I think it's really important for us to know what we have on our place, so that if we do find something new, that we know how to approach it. So knowing what you have helps to meet that responsibility for noxious weed management. And recognizing those plants really helps when something new shows up, so that if you're familiar with what you do have, then it's great to then be able to identify something that's actually new. So there's a number of resources that are available to help us identify plants. One of the most comprehensive ones that we have here for us in the West is Weeds of California and Other Western States. So when you read Weeds of California, it certainly has some species that are specific to California, but pretty much everything that we would have, California also has. It just got a very diverse set of landscapes, and so it would include most everything. And so this would be a great resource for you. It's actually a 2-volume set. It's quite comprehensive. For us specifically here in Idaho, we have a publication through University of Idaho. It's called Idaho's Noxious Weeds, and it is in a new edition this year. And as part of that new edition, you see this front cover, and this is one of the new species that's on the list. And Steve mentioned this one. It's called Turkish thistle. So this book has all the plants that are on the list. So it's a good reference from that standpoint. And it does detail aspects for plant identification. I'll show you that here in a second. It also details what category each of this plant species is in. So Steve mentioned that there's a prohibited group, there's a early detection rapid response group, a containment group, a control group. Those are all detailed here in this book. And a description of the noxious weed law is also in the front part of the book. It shows where we know the plant occurs. That doesn't mean that that's comprehensive in terms of all the places that it is actually located. Our detection capability for these species is not as good as it should be. And so just because it says that it's not in a particular county, that doesn't mean that it's not actually there. So you want to go ahead and let someone know if you find a species that hasn't been reported prior in your county. It also has, in the beginning, it has an email address to send pictures for identification. If there's something that you're concerned about, you can take pictures of the whole plant, the flowers, the leaves. If you can pull it up and take a picture of the root and send that to this address right here, and we will identify that plant for you. So this is what the inside of the book looks like. So here's that Turkish thistle, this new one. If you look at the category, it says category is EDRR, and then it'll give you a background of where it was from, gives you a description, and it'll show you aspects of the leaf, the flowers, and it'll also show you where it has been located. So here you can see it's been found in Idaho County, and the color category for EDRR is reflected in the county color here, and then also down in the bottom when you take a look at that leaf shape on the bottom right. It gives you a general outline of what that leaf shape is like. So that's a nice reference for us for Idaho in looking at the noxious weeds. There's another way in which we can identify plants, and that's utilizing a flora. And these are resources that really are useful for people who are dedicated to plant identification. Within them, they have what are called dichotomous keys. And what that means is that it's a forced choice. You choose this item or this item, and so you have to have all those characteristics there for these keys to work efficiently. It details and this key here is a forced choice. It's highly technical. And I wanted to show you an example of what one of these looks like. This one just happens to be ferns and fern allies. And so you can see here that there's a category 1A, and you make a decision based on that. And it has wonderful terms like scale-like leaves, swollen bases, single sporangium. So you need to know those types of terms in order to effectively utilize this. And so you would either have a 1A or a 1B. So it would either be that one or this 1B, which is plants with larger, usually pinnately compound leaves. And then it takes you down through that key and allows you to make more specific determinations of either the plant family or the plant species itself. So those are also possibilities, and there are times when I will use these keys. The one that I tend to use the most is an electronic form for plant ID, and you can get a number of these. They tend to be tailored towards specific weed books. In some instances, for example, one of the ones that I have is for the entire flora of the Pacific Northwest, and that's the one that I use more than the weed-specific ones. But these are fairly inexpensive, and they come on thumb drives, and you can plug them into your computer and use them. And I will come back to this and show you how this is used at the end here today. So one of the things that when you start getting to the point where you're looking at plants and wanting to know what the plant species are, sometimes it's helpful to know something about plant family characteristics. And I just wanted to look at this as a way to introduce plant identification for you, so that hopefully it will spark some interest, and maybe it'll even turn you into a plant nerd. You just never know what'll happen. But the first one that I wanted to look at is one of our largest plant families, and that's the sunflower family. What you'll find is that there's an awful lot of noxious weeds that are within this plant family. And so quite often we'll think about that as, boy, that's a family that's got a lot of bad actors. In reality, what it is it's going to have a lot of noxious weeds because it's just one of the largest families. But here you can see some examples. There's a Canada thistle here and oxeye daisy are a couple. But we have descriptions of those. There's usually the leaves alternate up the stem. If you take a look at one of the stems here, you'll see that that the leaves are not opposite of each other. They tend to be alternate going up that stem. And the flowers are in heads. And this is one of the things that's really interesting about the sunflower family, is because when we take a look at that oxeye daisy right there at the top, the white and the yellow one, we would call that an oxeye daisy flower, but in reality, that's actually a lot of different flowers, all combined into what's called a head. And so when you take a look at the common sunflower that you might grow in your garden, it is actually a collection of a lot of different flowers rather than just a single big flower. And they can have what are called a central disc flower and ray flowers, which is what we see here. We have both the disc flowers, which are in the middle, and the ray flowers, and I'll show you that a little bit closer up. Some of these plants, if they have all ray flowers, the ray flowers are the ones on the outside, like those white petals. If they're all ray flowers like that, then those plants are all going to have a milky juice. And so one of the ones that we would be very familiar with would be dandelion. And then that fruit is, it's the way in which you would characterize that. There's a technical term called an akene, which is the type of fruit that is formed from those seeds are called akenes. So when we take a look at some of our crops, you have sunflower here. Artichoke is really quite something. If you're ever in California in the Castroville area, near the Monterey Bay area, you can see these huge fields they're just all full of thistles. And so these are some of the plants that are in this family. Lettuce would also be in that group. So I'm going to show you what those little flowers look like up close. So you can see here that in that little circle, that's an individual flower surrounded by other individual flowers, and they start to open from the outside in. So the first ones that mature are on the outside, and then they go in. And here's just a picture of that cross section. You can see the seeds actually developing here. Some of our common examples would include thistles. So this is bull thistle. It's not on the noxious weed list, but it's one that we will commonly encounter. Another is Canada thistle, which is on the weed list, and it's one that's well distributed throughout the entire state. And so it's on that containment list, so that it's basically, you want to be a good neighbor and not allow these plants to move off of your property onto somebody else's. This one can cause some consternation among adjacent landowners. I know that in my own case, one of my neighbors doesn't control this, and they don't control white top either. And so then I'm always trying to do a border defense myself against these. So here's a picture of just an all ray flower plant. And when you take a look at a stem and cross section, or you break a leaf off, you'll see this latex, this milky juice. And so if they're all ray flowers in that family, they will always have milky juice. And that's true of lettuce too. If you get some fresh lettuce and break it off at the base, you'll see this white latex in that as well. Here's a plant. This is a pineapple weed where all you have are the disc flowers, and then Mayweed chamomile, which has both the disc flowers and the ray flowers. So some of these plants will have all disc flowers, some of them have all ray flowers, and some have both. So that's just a brief introduction to the sunflower family. it's really a very interesting plant family. And another one that has quite a few weedy species in it is the borage family. And they have an inflorescence that's coiled at the tip, and I'll show you a picture of that. Leaves are mostly alternate. They have rough and stiff hairs, and the flower petals are basically in fives, and they also have, when you look at the male flower parts, the stamens, there's 5 of those, and the fruits usually are what's called 4 nutlets, and you can see that here in the bottom picture. You can see the fruits developing there in the hound's tongue. This is that borage family, and this is real characteristic of a lot of them. Fiddleneck is a common name for this plant, and the reason for that is if you take a look at the side of a violin, right up at the top, you see that coil to the violin. That's reflected here in the way in which the flowers are arranged in a number of the borage family, and particularly that's the case with the fiddlenecks. Here's a picture of hound's tongue, and it is one that's on our noxious weed list. It is also one that causes some considerable consternation when it gets into animal fur, and then also on whatever you're wearing as well. It's also toxic to livestock, and so it's one that we are concerned about. Here's a close-up of the flowers. Another plant family that we have a number of different weeds in is the mustard family, and it's one that's interesting. It has 4 petals and 4 what are called sepals, which would be the green parts right below the petals. It has 6 stamens. There's 2 short ones and 4 longer ones, and that's the reason why that's important, is that there's another plant family that has 4 petals also, and so it helps us to identify one versus the other. And their fruits are things called silicles and siliques, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. If you want to take a look at what some of our crops are that are in this plant family, you'd have things like radishes, broccoli, turnips, those sorts of things. Here's a flower that demonstrates what I was talking about. You can see the 4 petals, and then there are 6 stamens in there, which are the male flower parts. When you take a look at the way in which the fruits are arranged, on the left is what's called a silique, and on the right is a silicle. And the way I try to remember this is something that's long and slim would be something that would be sleek, like silique, and so that's how I remember that, whether they're silicles or siliques. But that's the kinds of fruits that are on the mustard plants. Here's a arrangement of pictures that shows one of our noxious weeds. This is horicress or white top, and it has 4 petals, as you can see here. The picture in the field down below is really quite dominated by white top, and you can see the root system. It's a creeping root system, and that allows it to be a very aggressive competitor, and it will dominate areas. And those are all important characteristics for plant identification. Another one that's interesting is the chickweed family. Those leaves are always opposite or whorled, and they often have a slightly swollen section where the leaves are attached. Petals are usually 5, and they all look alike. So here's just a little chickweed here. Most of these don't end up on our noxious weed list, but they are plants that are really quite commonly found. Here's here's one that is baby's breath. And so this would be a former ornamental that has now become quite a noxious weed. Here you see a close-up of its stems, the opposite leaves, and the swelling at the point of attachment where the leaves come into the stem. And then the last one that I'll talk about is the Solanaceae, which is the potato family, and petunias are in that. There's a number of different things that are in that. One of the plants that's on our noxious weed list, buffalo burr, you can see here with all the spines on it. There are others that are weeds of agricultural areas, and they often will have these little berries that you see here. But the flowers are 5-petaled, and the petals are fused together. So it looks like it's a single petal, but it's actually 5 different ones. So now what I'd like to do is just introduce you. And Doug, how am I doing on time?
You're doing great, Tim.
Okay. So I'm going to stop that particular share and move over to a different share. Okay, so now when we take a look at this particular one, this is the XID program. And so what I thought we'd do is just go through, and I'll take you through how we might utilize this particular program. And so what I'd like you to do is to think about something that we would all commonly be able to call up in our heads as a plant that we would know, which would be just our common dandelion. So let's take a look at how we might use a program like this to identify a plant like that. So one of the things that you'll see here in the upper left are
Hey, Tim, I think,
yes.
Excuse me, I think that we are going to need to swap your presentation screen because we're looking at your PowerPoint.
You're still looking at my PowerPoint.
Yeah, so if you go to the top of your Zoom and view options, I think if you swap, that might be where you get it.
I had stopped sharing. And I tried sharing a different screen.
Yeah, and so that's usually controlled at the
Is that working now?
Yes. Now we're looking at the XID program.
Yes. Okay, great.
Excellent.
Thanks, Doug. So what you're seeing here is the XID program, and there are different characteristics. There's geography, general characteristics, flowers. So there's different plant characteristics. And down at the bottom, it shows you all the different plants that are still possibilities for selection. So what I was going to do with respect to the common dandelion is to say, okay, well, one of the things that we could do is we could go into flowers and go to flower color, and we probably can all come up with yellow as the flower color. And so if we go over here and we mark yes, what that does is it shows us two things. One is that it shows us how many plants that are in the list that have yellow flowers, and so we'll just mark that as a yes. It also shows that you can mark things like or no. So if you didn't know if it was either yellow or yellow orange, you could select both of those. But in this case, we'll go with yellow. And so that list down below, it had 1,000 species. Now it has 397 species. So if we then take a look at how those flowers are arranged, since we have that, we've already talked about the sunflower family and the fact that those flowers are arranged in heads. So we can go ahead and select head. And so what that does is that gives us and even finer reductions. And now just with those two characteristics, we've gone from 1,000 down to 159. So another thing that we could do would be to go, there's a really useful character selection, which is the general character. And in that we can see some things that sometimes they span across different plant families, but they're really very diagnostic. So in this case, if you've ever pulled a dandelion apart, you've seen that milky juice. And so that's something that we can say, yes, it does have a milky juice. So now with those three characters, we're now down to 27 different possibilities. We can also then go here to, we know that if you're playing with these, that they're all disseminated by wind. If you take a look at this, though, it says that almost all of them that are still in the selection are all going to be wind dispersed. And so that's not a characteristic that's going to be particularly useful. So we're going to back out of this and then go down to the leaves. And we're going to go to leaf shape. So you can look at the leaf shape. And the nice thing about the program is it gives you all these fancy words for linear, filiform, lanceolate, oblanceolate. So you see all those terms, but fortunately we have these pictures off on the side so it can help you come up with what that term actually means by giving you a visual cue. So in the case of dandelion, those leaves are going to be what is closest here, which is the pinnately lobed one. And so we'll go ahead and look at pinnately lobed and mark yes on that. And that gets us down to 18 different plants. If we take a look at the stem, one of the things that we can find is we can look at flowering stem leaves. And what we'll know is with our flowering portions of a dandelion is that they don't have stems going up they don't have leaves going up that main stem. So we'll say stem leafless. So what that does is it shows us that we're down now to about 7 plants. And usually when I get down to about 7 plants, I just go ahead and look at pictures. So I can show you that. There's another aspect of this particular program that helps, which is in the database function, but I think we'll just avoid that. But for right now, what you can do is you can look at pictures, and so you look at these pictures, and you can see whether or not that plant mimics what you see, and if it doesn't, then you can eliminate that one. So no, I know it's not that. So you can go down and you can look at each of these and look at the pictures and then determine which plant it actually is. And so in this case, it's just you could go through a process of elimination and get through all of these and then make your determination. So this type of a program is really quite useful for plant identification, and they tend to be pretty inexpensive. It's usually anywhere from $40 to $80 for one of these programs. And the other thing that you can do with them is you can look at kind of what ifs. If you get curious about plants, you can just look at things like, well, what's an unusual flower color? You could just select a flower color and see how many plants have that color, or a certain type of leaf arrangement. You could see how many plants tend to have that leaf arrangement. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can utilize a program like this. That is what I wanted to cover for us today.